This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Today's show begins with K-State Meat Science Extension Specialist Erin Beyer as she discusses basic food safety practices to keep in mind this summer, along with what cuts of meat may be best to throw on the grill this season. Kelsie Doty, Assistant Professor in Fashion Studies, joins the show as she explains what fabrics and clothes producers should consider to help stay maybe a touch cooler in the summer heat. K-State Dairy Specialist Mike Brouk ends the show as he encourages producers to take action now to reduce stable flies on the dairy and minimize revenue loss. That and more is coming up ahead.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we begin the show with K-State Meat Science Extension Specialist Erin Beyer as she highlights several beef topics in celebration of May being Beef Month. Erin, thanks for taking the time to join us today.
Of course. So happy to be here.
Beef is a huge driving factor to the economy here in Kansas. What kind of opportunities does that highlight or open up for producers?
The beef producers in this state contribute massively to the overall economy, not only in the state of Kansas, but also to the country in general, with over 26,000 producers, equating to over $11 billion in economic impact. So this month is really teed up to really highlight them on not only a state stage, but also a national stage. So in terms of opportunities, maybe it's primarily backed by a lot of just recognition and appreciation for the producers that we have in the state and how much they offer to consumers. Fantastic high quality beef product that everyone knows and loves. So there's a lot of campaigns that are being ran this month, driven by the Kansas Beef Council, spanning from billboards to campaigns on YouTube and on their social media and their website. So I think really the focus this year, from what I've seen, is just an overwhelming amount of support and recognition for all of the really hard work that producers are doing, not only this month, but throughout the year.
People, like you said, maybe are more mindful because of some of the campaigns going on about consuming beef during the month of May and as we come into the summer months. So maybe what are some more common cuts of meat that may grow in demand over the summer months?
Absolutely. So as someone who works primarily with consumers and with the meat products, beef being the primary product that I work with, we really characterize the two different seasons. Grilling season, which starts Memorial Day, so May, and then non-grilling season, which starts Labor Day. So we do that because beef sales really increases starting in Memorial Day, and that is due to cooking outside. And when we think about grilling, that is primarily focused around our naturally tender cuts of beef, which there are tons of options on the beef carcass that fits that description. But also, barbecuing also increases this season as well, being an outside activity. The classic fan favorites, of course, are going to be your strip steaks, your KC strip steaks, your ribeye steaks, but really some of my favorites that maybe are not always at the forefront of everyone's mind, maybe more economical especially, is going to be our culotte, which is our sirloin caps on that fat side of that sirloin, and also commonly known as the picanha. You can buy it as a roast and slice it yourself. You can also buy it as a steak. It's also fantastic to be cooked as a roast outside or inside, or to be grilled outside as a steak. So maybe this month, challenging yourself to get out there and try a new cut of beef that maybe you haven't tried before, and open up your eyes to other opportunities on the beef carcass. Some other ideas I have maybe would be that flat iron from the chuck, or maybe even that Denver steak. So 3 ideas out there for your next grilling session.
As we enter the summer months and grilling season, what are some basic food safety practices that we should keep in mind when cooking outdoors?
Food safety always needs to be the forefront. So everything that we do from a quality standpoint is always secondary to that of making sure that food safety is correct. So my number one tip always is to use a food thermometer, no matter if you're cooking inside or outside. Making sure everything hits that right temperature is incredibly important. For whole muscle beef that has not been mechanically tenderized or nothing has broken the surface in any capacity, really getting it to the USDA recommends 145 degrees Fahrenheit as that final internal temperature, which equates to a medium rare degree of doneness. Anything below that, while meat is considered sterile, so we're probably not at that high of a risk from a food safety perspective, but just know USDA recommends 145. That's for beef. Other species are different, but hence beef month, I'll only talk about beef food safety. So temperature is my number one. Other things that we see or we hear about is cross-contamination when prepping food. So whenever your meat is out, make sure you are washing your hands, cleaning food surfaces between that raw product, the cooked product, and then other sides such as veggies going on the grill as well. Minimizing cross-contamination, washing hands, and that thermometer usage are my top tips for keeping everyone safe this summer.
Erin, you talked a little bit about cooking meat to the right temperature, but how do we cook a perfect steak?
So not only food safety is one piece of it, but once you get past that safety component, cooking it to your preferred degree of doneness or to that preferred eating experience is really what I get to focus on for my job. So I think I've probably cooked tens of thousands of steaks, not making me the top expert, but that experience has definitely contributed to what I get to do now from an extension perspective, which is really cool. How do we get that perfect steak? It really depends on your preferences in terms of eating experience. And when I say eating experience, I'm primarily discussing how juicy is that steak, how flavorful is it, how tender is it. The majority of consumers will say that their preference is flavor, so maximizing that flavor, followed by tenderness and then juiciness. So you as a consumer might be slightly different, but that's just based off of our responses from consumers across the country. So then getting to that final product that makes you the happiest, there's two factors that can influence that palatability the most for you as a consumer. One is purchasing the correct steak. So what steak are you wanting for your preferred eating experience? We discussed some options already, being that strip steak, the ribeye, the picanha, the flat iron, the Denver being some common ones. So all really good tender cuts of meat. So capturing that tenderness bucket for palatability, and then juiciness and flavor. A lot of that goes into how you cook that steak. So the cookery, after you select your perfect steak, cooking it to the correct degree of doneness, the correct way for your preferences really goes a long way. So we always tell consumers that once you choose your steak, the next most important decision you can make is how you cook it. So my opinion or my suggestion here, if you're cooking it outside, great. That's going to be a high heat cookery. So you need to have that tender cut of meat already. And then maximizing your degree of doneness. Personally, I don't recommend anyone cooking it over that medium degree of doneness. I think it really takes away that juiciness and decreases tenderness and flavor. For me, the perfect steak is cooked at 145 degrees Fahrenheit, so that's that medium rare. And really the big tip that I always give consumers, or something that not everyone knows, is that when you take that steak off of the grill, it is actually going to increase in temperature up to 15 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you are going for that medium rare degree of doneness, you're not pulling it at 145, because if you do, your final degree of doneness will eat like a medium degree of doneness. So if you're someone that's like, man, I just can't quite get what I want when I'm grilling at home, well, try pulling it off the grill a little bit earlier. If you have that thermometer, that's going to be what helps you do that. And then that final degree of doneness will be what you're actually going after. So pulling it early, letting it rise, letting it sit for 3 minutes, that will allow those juices to stay inside of the steak and will get you to that degree of doneness that is your preference. So
you also mentioned barbecuing earlier. So what is the difference between grilling and barbecuing?
Yeah, another great question. So I think this is a common misconception for a lot of groups, that people might use the word barbecue, but they're actually grilling, or vice versa. And really the main difference is where and that level of heat and where it's coming from. So grilling is going to be really high heat right under that meat source, no matter if it's coals or electric or regardless of the type of heat source, it is coming from underneath, and it is direct and it's hot. So it's going to cook very quickly, and it is designed for already tender cuts of meat because you are not getting any tenderness improvement. You're most likely actually decreasing it as it cooks longer. So you need to have already a highly palatable cut of meat going on there to use that grilling method. Take less than 20 minutes from start to finish. Barbecue is what we consider a low and slow cooking method. So you have an indirect heat source, typically going to be like a smoke box or a box which has coals in it that indirectly heats typically a roast or a larger cut of meat over hours of a cooking period instead of very short period. So this can be a couple different reasons why you would choose this. One is going to be you have a roast that needs, if you put it on a high heat, you are going to just cook the outside and the inside will still be raw. So in order to cook the entire meat appropriately. Other reasons would be you have an inherently tough cut of meat, the brisket being the best example, that if you grill it, even if it's sliced, it is going to be inedible because it's so tough. So you need to allow that larger cut of meat to break down its connective tissue, we call that collagen, to turn into gelatin over time, and then get you that characteristic brisket that everyone knows and loves. So low and slow is barbecue. That's that indirect heat required for improving tenderness and or cooking that larger cut of meat. And then grilling is going to be that direct heat source right underneath that meat product, and it cooks very quickly with no improvement to tenderness. So two very different process. And that gives you very different flavor profiles, very different tenderness profiles, but definitely both have their place on your plate this summer.
Erin, thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Of course. Thank you so much.
Again, that was K-State Meat Science Extension Specialist Erin Beyer as she discussed grilling season, palatability, and how to cook the perfect steak. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll have more for you up ahead.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show discussing about picking out clothing to hopefully help keep you cooler with Assistant Professor of Fashion Studies in the College of Health and Human Sciences, Dr. Kelsie Doty. Kelsie, thanks for joining us today.
It is so good to be here. Hello.
Kelsie, in the wintertime, we talked about picking clothing or fabrics to hopefully stay warmer. So going to the flip side of that, what can we be picking to hopefully stay cooler? And starting off with fabric and fibers, what are our options and what should maybe we be choosing?
Okay, so when we talked before about dressing for cold weather, that was all about trapping air between layers to create insulation and keep ourselves warm, right? Now we're dressing for heat. The heat is coming to Kansas. We know it gets so hot here in the summer. So dressing for heat works the opposite way. We want air to move around the body to promote what we call evaporative cooling. You know, like when your sweat cools and you feel a lot better, right? So first thing we want to focus on is the fabric and fibers. We want to focus on natural fibers. Typically, cotton and linen are perfect for the summertime. They breathe, they absorb moisture, and they help the evaporative cooling process. Now, typically synthetics trap heat. They're plastic, essentially synthetic fibers. So pay close attention. I always want to point out, often nowadays to make textiles cheaper, we like to combine polyester with cotton. And so make sure you're checking your labels. If you feel like you have a shirt that's always making you run really hot, look at the label. It probably has like 30, 40, 50% polyester in it, just so they could keep the price point down on that product. So if you feel like you have a shirt that's always making you sweaty, check the label. It's probably partly synthetic. Now, that being said, there are synthetics that are created specifically for cooling. They have to be specifically made for that. So there are some synthetics that have specific weave structures and knit structures that let moisture move. So you just need to make sure that you're looking for those products. Look for moisture wicking is a term often used, or moisture management labels on garments for the summertime. So typically we want lighter weight, faster drying textiles. This is especially important when it gets hot and humid in Kansas, because it is going to get humid, and that humidity really prevents the evaporation from occurring off your body. So you really need lighter, faster drying textiles.
And for those textiles, does it matter how it fits on a person?
Yes, it does. So for fit and construction, clothing that drapes slightly off the body beats clingy fabrics, especially in hot and humid conditions. Too tight, when your clothing's too tight, it restricts that airflow. And if it's too loose, you could catch it on equipment. So be careful. I'm not saying wear something completely baggy, but you do need it to stay away from your body slightly. This seems counterintuitive, but more coverage is typically better than less coverage. So long sleeves, but lightweight and light colors in the summer is better. It's kind of like portable shade. Think of it that way. You're protecting your skin. Like I said, lighter colors are often better too. So you'll want light colors that reflect solar radiation. Obviously, if you are dark colors, that'll absorb the sunlight and make you hotter very quickly. So white, tan, khaki are pretty much the default for summer heat.
For t-shirts that might have big patches or ironed-on patterns on them, does that make a big difference?
If it's too big, like if it's a certain size, right? Like if you have a large black graphic on the back of your shirt, it'll probably trap some heat there. So be careful.
And while we're thinking about and talking about fabrics and clothing in agriculture in the summer, a lot of times denim is still worn. And we know sometimes denim is stretchier than other denim. And is there a makeup of the fabric and the textiles that makes a difference on how well it will handle the heat?
I would say typically for denim, it's a great textile because it is almost always majority cotton. There might be some stretch, but even if there is stretch, it takes very little spandex or lycra or any of that. It's like 1 or 2% creates a whole lot of stretch. So you're usually pretty safe no matter what for your denim products. Again, you might want to think about the color of them. If they're really deep, dark, rich blues, they're probably going to entrap heat more than a lighter blue denim object.
And then what about footwear for producers?
Okay, so I know boots are necessary. Absolutely. It is dangerous to be out on the job without correct footwear. However, I would say look for boots and shoes that have breathable uppers. I do think leather boots are superior, like 100% leather boots, and not there are cheaper boots out there that are kind of like a composite of different materials. Look for the 100% leather. They are more breathable. And I think in this case, socks make all the difference, 100% of the difference. Make sure you're buying either 100% cotton socks. They can be hard to find, actually. I find like they're really difficult to just find at your local stores. But if you can find 100% cotton socks, I think that is one of the right ways to go. Or a really thin wool sock. I actually wear wool socks 100% of the time almost. If I'm wearing socks, they're a wool sock. So in the summer, I just wear a really lightweight, thinner wool sock, but it does such a good job wicking moisture. I never have to worry about my feet overheating.
Going from the feet to the hands, you mentioned leather boots, so maybe leather gloves also a great option?
Yeah, I would agree. I do think leather gloves work well. Of course, I know everyone has their preferences when it comes to gloves and boots and hats, but I do find that leather in particular is great at wicking away moisture and making sure your hands aren't getting too hot when you're working on that tractor in the middle of the field and when it's broken down. So I do think it's overall good idea to do that.
What about when it comes to hats for producers?
Yeah, I know. We love our baseball hats. I know it. They're so practical. They're great, but honestly, when it is really hot and sunny out, a baseball cap leaves too much of your neck and the back of your head exposed. So if you can get a wide brim hat, 3 inches around or more, that's typically better. That is a better source of shade for you. Also, a wet bandana or a neck gaiter on the back of your neck could also kind of help if you really are dedicated to the baseball cap. A wet bandana or some kind of neck protection really helps significantly to cool down and make you feel better out in the hot conditions.
As we've been talking about choices that could be being made to hopefully help people stay cooler, why is that something that's important when it comes to people's health and safety?
Oh man, heat stress is a leading cause of occupational illness in ag workers. This is according to the CDC. It is one of the more dangerous things because I know you guys get, everyone gets busy on a farm and a ranch. You're out there, you just need to get your work done. But it sneaks up on you quickly. And if you're not hydrating, make sure you're drinking enough water. If you're not hydrating, if you're not wearing the correct protective clothing, it can be really dangerous, especially when as we age and get older. So just making sure that you are paying attention to how you feel. Clothing is just one of the few heat interventions that's really something everyone can control. So I hope everyone can be safe out in the hot weather this summer. Just look for clothing that's durable, that functions. Obviously, we need things that are affordable, but look for the clothes that protect you and really invest in pieces that are going to protect your health.
Kelsie, we've talked about things for people to wear to hopefully help stay cool, but what are a few things that you would highly recommend producers not wear when they are going outside in the heat?
You don't need a black t-shirt in the summer. It looks good, but terrible out there in the fields. That's not going to work. Short sleeves, first of all, you're not protecting yourself. The dark colors are going to absorb all that heat. Yeah, just avoid the fashion objects as much as you can while you're working outside.
Kelsie, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Anytime. Love to be here.
That was Assistant Professor of Fashion Studies in the College of Health and Human Sciences at Kansas State University, Dr. Kelsie Doty. Before we cut to a break, we're now going to be joined by USDA's Rod Bain and USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey as they discuss a rare occurrence within the U.S. Drought Monitor, reflecting a prolonged period of over 3/5 of the country being in drought coverage.
A significant stretch of drought, according to the U.S. Drought Monitor, and as of the most recent edition for the period ending May 5th.
We have seen U.S. drought coverage, if you look at the lower 48 states, topping 60% for 5 consecutive weeks.
With USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey noting the current total U.S. drought coverage at just under 61%. The consecutive weeks of 60% or greater drought coverage in our nation.
That's pretty rare territory in the 27-year history of the U.S. Drought Monitor. If you go back to the beginning of the product in the summer of 1999 and continue to present, there have only been 30 weeks prior to this year where we have seen U.S. drought coverage greater than 60%.
With 25 of the 30 weeks in the drought of 2012-13, and the remaining recorded at different times of 2022. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Once again, that was USDA's Rod Bain and USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey, as they did discuss the U.S. Drought Monitor. If you are wanting to keep up to date with weather happening in Kansas, one way you can do that is by checking out K-State's Mesonet website. That website is mesonet.ksu.edu. Once again, that is mesonet.ksu.edu. I will link it in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you up ahead.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. We end today's program with this week's milk lines. Stable flies are a major concern for dairy producers in the spring. They cause painful bites to the legs of cattle, resulting in reduced milk production, extreme stress, and cattle bunching. K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk is encouraging producers to take action now to reduce stable flies on the dairy and minimize revenue loss.
Today I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy producers concerning stable flies. Yes, it's that time of year again. And as you walk through your barns, you might notice that some of your cattle are gathering together in groups, and you don't like that. You'd rather see them at the bunk or maybe laying in their stalls, but instead they're standing up in a bunch someplace in the barn. And in different barns it may be in different places, and it may be associated with airflow, and it may not be, and you think it's heat stress. Well, that's not necessarily the case. You might want to take a look at what's going on with the tails and what's going on with the legs. If you see the tails switching and you see cattle stomping their feet, it's likely stable flies. Stable flies are biting flies, and they tend to hang out on the legs of our dairy cattle as well as the belly and the udders. and they inflict a lot of pain on our animals. They also inflict a lot of pain on our checkbook, and sometimes we just don't recognize just how much that is. You know, there's some recent studies that have been completed that indicate that as little as one stable fly per leg can reduce milk production by 1.2 pounds per cow per day. Wow. And it's not unusual to find many flies per leg, and a lot of times we calculate that we have a real problem when we start to see somewhere between 4 and 5 flies per leg. But I just want you to know that even as little as 1 fly per leg can be causing you issues. So why do the cattle bunch? Number one, these flies, when they bite, it hurts. So there's some pain inflicted, so animals tend to gather when that happens. Also, if you kind of watch animal behavior within that group, animals are always trying to get to the center. Why? Well, if they can get to the center of the mob, there's less likely that the flies will find their way in, so they'll be getting bit less than those on the outside edge of that bunch of animals. So what can you do about this? Well, I think when we look at stable flies, they're probably one of the more difficult flies for us to control because they follow some different rules compared to house flies and other flies that we see on the dairy farm. Number one, these flies generally do not get above 3 feet off the floor. So they're on the legs, they hang out on the bellies. They only show up during the daytime. They do not rest in our barns in the evenings. They actually leave the barn and they go out and they rest in the grass. So if you're using premise sprays and spraying on the structure of your buildings, they're probably never going to come in contact with that chemical because they're never on those surfaces. So if we're going to actually get control of stable flies, we generally have to use something on the animal, and we generally have to repeat that in order to maintain control. Stable flies love the cool spring weather, and they actually flourish during this time, so we generally have more trouble with stable flies early in the spring and into the early summer than other types of flies such as house flies. They do increase heat stress on animals as well because in these bunches we tend to get heat buildup within the animals. So on those warm days when we see those animals bunching, you may see some animals that are panting and expressing signs of heat stress, and they are more heat stressed because they have been bunched together. Difficult to break these mobs of cattle up and get them to not bunch unless you get rid of the stable flies. So if you see your cows bunching in your barns this time of year, probably need to get close enough where you can determine whether or not you have a stable fly issue, because without some intervention, it'll only get worse and cause the animals to spend even more time standing, less time eating, less time producing milk. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairy farmers to get out and check out whether or not stable flies might be reducing your milk check this week.
Thanks, Mike. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.